The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to The Fire You Can't Put Out. With you again this week, my name is Melvin. Thank you for joining us. We are taping today a little earlier than anticipated because this weekend I am going to be out of town DJing a wedding, but obviously that's all inside baseball stuff, not necessary for you to know. But I just wanted to give you some idea of at what point during history I am reporting the week's news. Today is Monday, September 23rd, and we are 1 week away from a government shutdown, or what the Republicans like to call making a point. The numbers on this are pretty damning. There was a government shutdown during the 90s, and whenever this kind of a thing comes about, and these kind of manufactured crises seem to be coming up every couple of months, and the Republicans seem to like it that way, even if they pass a bill right now, they want Obamacare to be defunded. And even if they pass a bill right now, a spending bill to fund what they've already spent, even it is only going to go out until December. You know why? Because they want to have this fight again in December. Every couple of months. Keep it fresh. Keep it hot. So what they're saying right now is, we want to strip out Obamacare and then we'll pass the bill. Knowing that even if they stripped out Obamacare, it wouldn't make it to the Senate. And even if it did make it to the Senate, it wouldn't make it to the president. They shut down the government, the Republicans, after they got power, led by Newt Gingrich. They shut down the government during the 90s. They said, it's fine. Everyone will blame the president. But they didn't blame the president. They blamed the Republicans in Congress. And they took a pretty nasty hit for it. This time, hopefully, will be just the same. They like to say that when these things happen, they like people to think it's the president. It's all the president. Because most people don't realize how little power the president actually has. So we'll see what happens. We're 1 week away. I want to get into gun violence, though. It's not a fun subject. It's not a sexy subject. And it's one that more than a few of us are tired of talking about. It's been a week now since the shooting in the D.C. yard, where about a dozen were killed and almost as many were wounded. And so there's a big debate going on about that right now. As I mentioned last week, these things happen and sometimes they're not even news. Violence has sort of just become the American way right now. And that's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be. Quoting from thinkprogress.org, an article by Cy Merkerji. This comes to us from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Officer Randall Carrick in North Carolina is facing charges of voluntary manslaughter after fatally shooting Jonathan Ferrell, 24, a Florida A&M football player who had apparently been seeking help after surviving a major car crash early Saturday morning. This happened a little more than a week ago. CMPD officials called the shooting excessive. Our investigation has shown that Officer Carrick did not have a lawful right to discharge his weapon during this encounter, said CMPD Chief Rodney. So they have admitted fault. CMPD Chief Rodney Monroe. The Charlotte Observer reports that the car crash was so severe that Ferrell likely had to pull himself out of the wreckage. He then walked to the nearest house, about half a mile away, to seek assistance, but the local residents whose home Ferrell arrived at was frightened that he was attempting to burglarize her after not recognizing him. This would be a good time to mention that he's an African American. The resident made a 911 call. 3 officers arrived at the scene and acted aggressively. and they say he acted aggressively towards them. Officer Thornell Little of the Hickory Grove Division of the CMPD responded with an unsuccessful attempt to fire his taser at Ferrell. Police say that when Ferrell continued to charge toward the police, 27-year-old Randall Carrick discharged his weapon several times, eventually killing Ferrell. There is no comprehensive tracking mechanism for police shootings. FBI spokespeople have said there is no mandate to keep such statistics and that it would take an act of Congress in order to establish a database. Congress so far has refused to act. This is one of the really important things that we need to realize in a nation where we have so many guns. More guns does not lead to less violence. It leads to more violence. It's pretty simple. Like more water is going to lead to a deeper pool. More does not equal less. Guns, when used as directed, murder. That's it. That's their only thing. But the debate goes on. We need more guns. Why? Because more guns will lead to less violence. So, in the fierce gun debate that always follows the latest mass shooting, it's an argument you hear frequently from gun rights promoters. If only more people were armed, there would have been a better chance of stopping these terrible events. This has plausibility problems. What were the odds that, say, a moviegoer with a pack of Twizzlers in one pocket and a Glock in the other would be mentally prepared, properly positioned, and skilled enough to take out a body-armored assailant in a smoke and panic-filled theater? Whether you believe that would happen is ultimately a matter of theory and speculation. Instead, let's look at some of the facts gathered in a 5-month investigation by Mother Jones. In the wake of the massacres this year at a Colorado movie theater, by the way, this article comes from 2012, end of 2012, a Colorado movie theater, a Sikh temple in Wisconsin, and Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, we set out to track mass shootings in the United States over the last 30 years and identified and analyzed 62 of them. One striking pattern in the data is that in not a single case was the killing stopped by a civilian using a gun. Not a single case. And in other recent but less lethal rampages in which armed civilians attempted to intervene, those civilians not only failed to stop the shooter, but were also gravely wounded or killed. Moreover, we found that the rate of mass shootings has increased in recent years at a time when America has been flooded with millions of additional firearms and a barrage of new laws that has made it easier and easier for everyone to carry them in public places, including bars, parks, and schools. Through a combination of national surveys and manufacturing sales data, we know that the increase in firearms has far outpaced population growth. In 1995, there were an estimated 200 million guns in private hands. Today, there are around 300 million. That's a 50% jump in 18 years. The U.S. population now, over 314 million, grew by about 20% in that period. At this rate, there will be a gun for every man, woman, and child before the decade ends. There's no evidence indicating that arming Americans further will help prevent mass shootings or reduce the carnage, says Dr. Stephen Hartigan, a leading expert on emergency medicine and gun violence at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Armed civilians attempting to intervene are actually more likely to increase bloodshed, said the doctor. In the past 4 years, across 37 states, the NRA and its political allies have pushed through 99 laws making it easier to own, carry, and conceal your gun from the government. Further evidence, this coming also from Mother Jones by Mark Fullman, written right around the same time. Do armed civilians actually stop mass shooters? The answer, in short, is no. See, when conservatives try to point out, well, this mass shooting was stopped by this guy and this mass shooting was stopped by this guy, they omit a lot of important details from those stories. But that's okay. They're trying to make it fit their narrative. They're defending a murder weapon. You can't fault them for lying. Let's take the Appalachian School of Law shooting in Grundy, Virginia. Gun rights diehards frequently credit the end of the rampage at the school in 2002 to armed students who intervened. They conveniently ignore that those students also had to be current and former law enforcement officers, and that the killer, according to police investigators, was out of ammunition by the time they got to him. Let's take the high school shooting in Pearl, Mississippi, another case from 1997, in which the shooting was apparently already over. After killing 2 and wounding 7 inside Pearl High School, the 16-year-old perpetrator left the building. When outside near the parking lot, the assistant principal, who was also a member of the Army Reserve, ran out to his own vehicle, grabbed a handgun that he kept there, and then approached the shooter, subduing him at gunpoint until authorities arrived. There's 2 cases that they love to cite, but in neither one was the shooting stopped by an armed civilian. Let's take the bar shooting in Winnemucca, Nevada. In 2008, a gunman who killed 2 and wounded 2 others was taken out by another patron in the bar who was carrying with a valid permit. But this was no regular Joe with a concealed handgun. The man who intervened was not charged after authorities determined he had committed a justifiable homicide and that he was a U.S. Marine. A shopping mall shooting, in Tacoma, Washington. As a rampage unfolded in 2005, a civilian with a concealed carry permit named Brendan McCone confronted the assailant with his handgun. The shooter pumped several bullets into McCone, wounding 6 people before eventually surrendering to police after a hostage standoff. A comatose McCone eventually recovered after weeks in the hospital. There's your regular Joe with a gun. Your regular guy, right? He had his gun, his concealed permit, his training, and all the rest, and he got shot. He didn't stop the shooting. Let's take the courthouse shooting in Tyler, Texas in 2005. A civilian named Mark Wilson, who was a firearms instructor, fired his licensed handgun at a man on a rampage at the county courthouse. Wilson was shot dead by the body-armored assailant who wielded an AK-47. According to Robert McMenemy of the FBI, civilians, he's talking about, make it more difficult for law enforcement officers to do their jobs. In a scenario like that, McMenemy told me recently they wouldn't know who was good and who was bad, and it would divert them from the real threat. Therein lies the problem. So, the gun debate goes on. The argument that what we need to do is put weapons, dangerous weapons, in the hands of folks like you and I who get to live on the edge, right? And at any given moment, when a fight breaks out, right? Someone whips out a gun, starts killing people, you or I, the idea that you or I is going to take that guy down, right? What's really behind these nuts wanting to own guns, right? And there's nothing wrong with owning a gun. Let me be clear. I have shotguns. I enjoy guns, right? I've had fun. I do well with targets. I won't own one because I have children in the house. And in my opinion, that's irresponsible. But, your mileage may vary. To each their own, quite honestly. So, recently, Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, said, you know what? You can bring your guns into Starbucks still, but really we'd rather that you didn't because it's making everybody uncomfortable. We're not going to ban them, but it is making everybody uncomfortable, so please consider others' feelings before you walk in with your gun hanging out, and the right has gone nuts. Their quote, people have a right to protect themselves. People have a right to protect themselves. They say it's in the Second Amendment, right? We have a right to protect ourselves. Second Amendment. Okay, let's talk about the Second Amendment, shall we? As it turns out, thanks to research done by Tom Hartman, the Second Amendment, perk up, cons, the Second Amendment was about slavery. Follow me. What is ignored in the NRA's arguments is that at the time the U.S. Constitution was written, the militia in the South was known by another name, the Slave Patrol. And virtually all men of age served in its ranks at one point or another as far back as 1680 in Virginia. The militias were organized to prevent the frequent meetings of considerable numbers of Negro slaves under pretense of feasts and burials is judged to be of dangerous consequence. Meaning, the Virginia militia was tasked with breaking up slave rebellions by busting any slave who might be organizing one. It even gave incentive to men to serve on the militia. Any freed colored person, black, Native American, or any other, if caught fleeing by the militiamen, would be turned over to them as property and then enslaved. With the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, there was concern among slaveholders that their militias and their slave patrols would be usurped by the new federal government using the provisions outlined in Article 1, Section 8. Patrick Henry, in particular, was quite vocal on the subject, saying, "Let me here call your attention to that part, Article 1, Section 8 of the proposed Constitution, which gives Congress the power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for government such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. By this, sir, you see that their control over our last best defense is limited. If they neglect or refuse to discipline or arm our militia, they will be useless. The states can do neither," and it goes on. He's also quoted as saying, "If the country be invaded, a state may go to war, but cannot suppress slave insurrections. If there should happen an insurrection of slaves, the country cannot be said to be invaded. They cannot, therefore, suppress it without the interposition of Congress. Congress and Congress only can call forth the militia." In other words, the U.S. Congress could disarm the patrols needed to keep slaves in line, eliminating slavery with one bold and quick move overnight. The Second Amendment itself was purposely designed to empower the states to manage and handle their slave patrols, their militias. Which is why, when Thomas Jefferson and James Madison draft up the Second Amendment, he had to change the language from this. Here's the original language. "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person." The language that we know today, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, to the South, the Second Amendment was about slavery, slave patrols, keeping their slaves in line. To a more northern mindset, the idea was to not have standing armies, to realize the necessity for a weapon, but to not have standing armies. Which is why the way we fund the military is only every 2 years, right? The military has to be refunded every 2 years. Why? Because the forefathers, as they like to say, as they like to quote so religiously, did not want standing armies. Because they knew that standing armies would lead to more war than it would peace. And look now. Not only is there almost always a war going on, but at times there are several wars going on. We recently were able to escape getting into a third war. So, with the shootings happening over and over, the Philip Bump over at the Atlantic Wire believes, after pushing together all the data from past shootings, believes that, not to an exact degree, but to some degree, he might be able to predict somewhat where the next shooting is going to happen. Where is the next mass shooting going to happen? Spokane, Washington, February 2014. Easy, Spokane. I know you're out there listening. The next mass shooting will take place on February 12, 2014 in Spokane, Washington, and it will be committed by an emotionally disturbed 38-year-old white man who will kill 7 people and wound 6 more at a place he used to work with a semi-automatic handgun he purchased legally in the state. Here are just a few points of how we came to this. Looking at the past 30-plus years of spree and mass shootings, the easiest trend is that it's white. More than 2/3 have been white. Okay, a shooting at work. Most of the shootings in the database occurred at a place of business, either one where the shooter worked or a restaurant or other such facility. The largest category of shootings is other, with nearly half of all shootings taking place at some public location. Workplace shootings comprise just under 1/3 of incidents. Of all of our predictions, this one is the most tenuous. 38 years old. By focusing on the workplace as the site of the incident, it has allowed us to better refine the age of the shooter. School shootings are somewhat obviously undertaken by younger people, narrowing the possible venues for an incident to workplaces and other venues. We were able to calculate the age of men committing such crimes. 38. Include school shootings, though, that age drops to 35.6. Mental health. It's clear that there exists a correlation between a pattern of mental illness and involvement in mass shootings. The Mother-Jones Index has documented examples of treatment attempts, for example, lending as much objectivity as possible, and it shows that about 63% of those involved in mass shootings had some history of mental health issues. The legally purchased handgun. Point by point. Here we go. The vast majority of handguns used in mass shootings were obtained legally. 81.8%. Opponents of gun control will know that nearly 1/5 of the shootings used illegally obtained guns, suggesting that new controls won't prevent anything. La rah rah. Okay, almost 3/4 of the time the guns were purchased in the same state as the incident. February 2014. This is one of the more complex calculations. Over the past 30 years, figures about 222 days, 7 months or so between shootings. Since the first shooting in 2004, incidents have occurred about once every 149 days. This is actually less frequently than they've occurred since 2009 alone, or since since Obama became president. There's been a shooting about every 3 months. Which to use? Extrapolating from the Washington, D.C. shooting, the first value gave us a date of April 27, 2014. The latter gave us February 12th. There have been 6 events in February and 4 in April. The former then is more historically likely. So, February it was. Now, how did we get to Spokane, Washington? We noticed that in looking at the data, there was some correlation between the number of incidents and in a state and its population. In other words, there were more incidents where there were more people. The more incidents occurred in the more populous state, California, which makes sense. Florida had the second most number of shootings despite being 4th on the population list. So, using California's 7 incidents as the peg, we calculated how many incidents would be expected in a state if they were tied solely to a population. Florida, with a population about half of California's, would be expected to see about half as many shootings by that standard. Washington State has had 4 more shootings than its population would predict. 5 incidents where 1.27 might have been expected. To determine the answer, we went back to our other demographics. First, we used census data to figure out what states had the most men between 18 and 45 as a function of total population. Washington State ranks 9th in the number of people in that category. 18.46% of its men are in that age group. In order to determine the city, we went back to population data, calculating the average population of each location where these incidents occurred, and it gave us an average population of 214,000, and Spokane is about 209,000. The Spokesman Review was on top of this pretty quickly, because that's a pretty scary thing to say. So this comes from Kip Hill at the Spokesman Review. Numbers crunched by the Atlantic Reporter for a shooting to happen in Spokane. An FBI agent in Spokane is saying that the study is without merit. His name is Frank Ferrell. The FBI supervisor, senior resident agent in Spokane, said the overly specific details and bumps analysis takes it into the theater of the absurd. I understand the sort of broad construct, I'm quoting now, of what he's trying to do, Ferrell said, but I think it veers into something that is without validity. Bum stressed that the prediction is based on statistical probability, and that the specificity of the prediction does not make it more likely the events will come to pass. There's also no way this will come true. Bub, who said he does a fair deal of data analysis, works as a political writer for Mother Jones. Now, stating that it's going to be a white man, that's easy, okay? And so he's quoted as saying, if I had $1 million to bet on the next shooting, I would bet $900,000 on the man and another $100,000 on the fact that it's a white man. So we'll say the man part is the most likely, that it's not going to be a lady. Well, the numbers clue in the public to warning signs for the next mass shooting. Bump warned against alarmism. He hopes his predictions don't come to pass. Whew! Our sincere hope is that the prediction we made is wrong and that no mass killings happen again. But Bump also realizes that he lives in America and this is becoming how we pass time. So, what to do now? So, the cons are going nuts. You can't ban guns. We want more murder. Fine. So, has there ever been a country where mass killings were just off the charts? And something was done about it. And that something actually worked. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet John Howard. He wrote an op-ed for the New York Times in January of 2013. John Howard was Prime Minister of Australia from 1996 to 2007. He was, and I'm quoting now, I was elected Prime Minister in early 96, leading a center-right coalition. Center-right. Virtually every non-urban electoral district in the country where gun ownership was higher than elsewhere sent a member of my coalition to Parliament. 6 weeks later, on April 28, 1996, Martin Bryant, a psychologically disturbed man, used a semi-automatic Armalite rifle and a semi-automatic SKS assault weapon to kill 35 people in a murderous rampage in Port Arthur, Tasmania. After this wanton slaughter, I knew I had to use the authority of my office to curb the possession and use of the type of weapons that killed 35 innocent people, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. Our gun lobby isn't as powerful or well-financed as the NRA in the United States. Australia, correctly in my view, does not have a Bill of Rights, so our legislators have more say than in America's over issues of individual rights, and our courts have less control. Also, and he's pointing out the differences here, we have no constitutional right to bear arms. After all, the British granted us nationhood peacefully. The United States had to fight for it. Okay? Because Australia is a federation of states, the national government has no control over gun ownership, sale, or use beyond controlling imports. Given our decentralized system of government, I could reduce the number of dangerous firearms only by persuading the states to enact uniform laws totally prohibiting the ownership, possession, and sale of automatic and semi-automatic weapons while the national government banned the importation of such weapons. To make this plan work, there had to be federally financed gun buyback scheme. Almost 700,000 guns were bought back and destroyed, which would be the equivalent, considering our population, of 40 million guns in the United States. City dwellers supported our plan, but there was strong resistance in some rural Australia. Many farmers were then being told to surrender weapons that they had used safely all their lives. Penalizing decent, law-abiding citizens because of the criminal behavior of others seemed unfair. Many of them had been lifelong supporters of my coalition, and I felt bewildered and betrayed by these new laws. I understood their misgivings, yet I felt there was no alternative. Remember that, okay? Penalizing decent, law-abiding citizens because of the criminal behavior of others. Is this at all sounding familiar? The fundamental problem was the ready availability of high-powered weapons, which enable people to convert their murderous impulses into mass killings. Nothing trumps easy access to a gun. It's easier to kill 10 people with a gun than it is with a knife. Passing gun control laws was a major challenge for my coalition partner, the Rural Conservative National Party. In the end, we won the battle to change gun laws because there was majority support across Australia for banning certain weapons. And today, there is a wide consensus that our 1996 reforms not only reduced gun-related homicide rate, but also the suicide rate. The Australian Institute of Criminology found that gun-related murders and suicides fell sharply after 1996. The American Law and Economics Review found that our gun buyback scheme cut firearm suicides by 74%. In the 18 years before 1996 reforms, Australia suffered 13 gun massacres, each with more than 4 victims, causing a total of 102 deaths. There has not been a single massacre in the category since 1996. Few Australians would deny their country is safer today as a consequence of gun control. The name of that article is I Went After Guns and Obama Can Too, which I thought was a bold thing. And it's not just our people, with the exception of the NRA nuts. It's not just regular American people that are getting sick of these shootings happening all the damn time. So are the experts. Dave Cullen, a journalist and author on the definitive book of the Columbine High School massacre, says he's conflicted when interview requests start coming in after yet another mass shooting, whether it occurred in Aurora, Newtown, or more recently, Washington, D.C. Cullen expressed concerns Monday night on Facebook about adding his voice to the inevitable media crush that follows such tragedies, like the morning shooting at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard. I don't want to do this anymore, he said Monday night on an Australian radio show. I don't want to do this for a living. At the same time, he feels like he has to do his job. Then there's Dr. Janice Orlowski, the chief medical officer at MedStar Washington Hospital Center. And she's quoted by saying, she was giving a press conference after the shooting the other night, there's something evil in our society that we as Americans have to work to try to eradicate, she said after decrying what she called senseless trauma. There's something wrong here when we have these multiple shootings, these multiple injuries, she continued. There's something wrong. I would like you to put my trauma center out of business, she said. I really would. I would really like to not be an expert on gunshots. I don't want to be an expert on this, she said. It's a great city. It's a great country. We have work to do to get rid of this, she concluded, because we just cannot have, one more shooting with, so many people killed. Her name is Janice Orlowski. You should look it up. It's a really hard thing to listen to, but she's right. It seems the only people that aren't sick of the mass shootings is the NRA and their ilk. So, who is their ilk? Well, their ilk made themselves heard after the most recent Miss America pageant. Didn't take long for the T-Publicans. And by the way, I want to point that out. A lot of the media outlets that reported on this said, oh, it's just a few dumb Americans. No. No, these are teabaggers, okay? And you'll know after some of this language that I'm about to use. It didn't take them long to start attacking the newly crowned Miss America, Nina Davaluri. The Twitterverse exploded with comments after she was chosen. She was described as an Arab, which she's not, a Muslim, which she's not, and by those who did not understand that she is of Indian heritage, Miss 7-Eleven. Fox News radio host Todd Starnes opined that she does not represent American values and that a better, more representative choice would have been Miss Kansas, Theresa Vale, who is blonde, blue-eyed, a veteran of the Kansas National Guard, is pursuing the double majors of chemistry and Chinese at Kansas State University, and was excluded, according to Starnes, simply because the liberal Miss America judges were not interested in a gun-toting, deer-hunting military veteran. Blah, 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 blah. So, a small sampling of the tweets. If you're hashtag Miss America, you should be an American. And of course, they're saying she's not, because she's not white. Want proof? Another tweet. When will a white woman win hashtag Miss America ever? Another one. Well, they just picked a Muslim for Miss America. That must make Obama happy. Maybe he had a vote. Yeah, I told you. They're teabaggers. Miss America right now or Miss Al-Qaeda? And another one said, 9/11 was just 4 days ago and she gets Miss America? It's racism. Pure racism. Deva Lourdes' parents immigrated to Missouri in 1981, where her father was a gynecologist. They later moved to Syracuse, New York, where she was born in 1989, and lived there until the family moved to Oklahoma when she was 4, and then later to Michigan, where she attended college, moving back to Fayetteville, a Syracuse suburb, in the mid-2000s, where her family is an Obgyn affiliated with St. Joseph's Hospital. Her goal is to become a cardiologist eventually. She's an American through and through. She's not white. You got that right, teabaggers. But she's an American. So, the Republicans have been passing bills, good-hearted Christian bills, as one would only expect, because the House is so full of self-described Christians. Friday morning, House Republicans, joined by 2 Democrats, passed a short-term extension of government funding known as a continuing resolution through December that continues sequestration severely reduced spending levels for non-defense programs while giving some relief to the defense side. Remember, they protected defense. Sequestration's effects have already had a devastating effect this year. More than 57,000 children have lost their slots in Head Start. Cancer patients have been denied chemotherapy. Low-income families have lost their housing vouchers. Domestic violence victims have been turned away from services. The homebound elderly are receiving fewer visits from Meals on Wheels. The homeless are getting less support, as are job seekers. The long-term unemployed are getting reduced checks. Schools on or near military bases and Native American reservations are laying off staff and closing schools. Scientific researchers are firing staff and shutting down projects. Public schools are increasing class sizes and reducing staff. More than 650,000 employees at the Department of Defense were furloughed. The pain will compound if the cuts continue into next year. The cuts have also harmed the economy. They've been a drag on economic growth, spending, and wages. The Congressional Budget Office has found that undoing sequestration would add as much as 1.2% to GDP and 1.6 million jobs. Yet, a number of Republicans have voiced their support for the cuts. House Judiciary Chair Bob Goodlatte called sequestration a legitimate effort to implement budget cuts. Representative Billy Long, these are all Republicans, claim that people want to see more sequestration and not less, and that there has not been any measurable effect. John Boozman argued that the sequestration is actually working. The Christian House cut $39 billion from food stamps. The House approved legislation Thursday that would cut $39 billion in funds over the next decade for food stamp programs. Members approved H.R. 3102, the Nutrition Reform and Work Opportunity Act, in a close 217 to 210 vote. No Democrats voted for the bill, and 15 Republicans voted against. GOP leaders. The bill would authorize food stamp programs for 3 years. The legislation, part of which was developed by Majority Leader Eric Cantor, passed in the face of fierce opposition from House Democrats, a White House veto threat, and warnings that it was already dead on arrival in the democratically controlled Senate. Several Democrats warned that cutting $39 billion from the program, formerly known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is a cruel step that would only hurt people in need. Many in the Republican Party have falsely claimed that food stamps create a welfare dependency. The problem with that analysis is that all parameters of the economy point to a middle class that is stressed, it points to a growing poor, and it points to a system where wages are falling or stagnant. This is quite honestly pure evil. There's plenty of things we can cut money out of. Let's start with defense. Let's start with tax cuts for billionaires. Taking food out of people's mouths and then going to church, clasping your hands together and calling yourself a Christian. It's cold. Speaking of cold, I know Texas is normally known as a hot, right? Climate-wise, hot state. No, absolutely not. They've admitted that their anti-abortion laws are not about women's health. Texas Republicans have claimed that forcing all abortion clinics in the state to meet the requirements of ambulatory surgical centers and have admitted privileges at local hospitals was for women's safety. Thanks to the Texas Tribune, we can now quantify that it is BS. A Texas Tribune review of the state inspection records for 36 abortion clinics from the year preceding the lawmakers' vote turned up little evidence to suggest that facilities were putting patients in imminent danger. State auditors identified 19 regulatory violations that they said presented a risk to patient safety at 6 abortion clinics that are not ambulatory surgical centers in Texas. None was severe enough to warrant financial penalties, according to the State Department of Health Services, which deemed the facility's corrective action plan sufficient to protect patients. Okay, and between 2008 and 2013, the Texas Medical Board, which regulates the state's physician, took action against just 3 doctors who performed abortions, all of them for administrative fractions that did not involve criminal practices for late-term abortions. The safety of the procedure, as it has been practiced in Texas to this point, is reflected in the fact that no Texas woman has died from abortion-related complications since 2008. From 2000 to 2010, the abortion-related death rate was 0.57 per 100,000 in Texas. By contrast, the maternal mortality rate for Texas has quadrupled over the last 15 years, 24.6 out of 100,000 live births in 2010, from 6.1 to 100,000, 6.1 per 100,000 live births in 1996, according to a report last year from the state's Department of Health Services. Of course, under the new law's restrictions, more women are likely to turn to unsafe, illegal abortions, whether by trying to self-induce. The self-induction rate in Texas is already several times the national rate. Right. As when the abortion clinic closes, the coat hanger clinic will remain open. From Texas, again, this comes to us courtesy of Ross Story. A Texas woman who was shamed by her doctor for having a hickey and wanting birth control says she is now forced to drive 4 hours to a Planned Parenthood clinic for health care due to the state's new anti-abortion laws. Athena Mason told KUT that her first visit to the doctor as a student at Texas A&M was awkward. I had a hickey and the doctor was just like, "You shouldn't be doing that," she recalled. I'm like, "It's a hickey. It's nothing major." But I got a lecture. He said my boyfriend was abusive and all these other things. And then I asked for birth control. I did not hear the end of that. So I said, "Never mind. I'll go someplace else." Mason started using the Planned Parenthood clinic in Bryan. But that facility is one of 4 women's health service centers that closed in August after the state passed new regulations restricting abortion. So Mason now drives 4 hours to the Planned Parenthood clinic in Austin for health care. In 1998, Cadence King was diagnosed with precancerous cells on her cervix and became a patient at the Planned Parenthood clinic in Bryan. She had returned for regular checkups in the years since, but she has missed visits in recent weeks because the clinic closed. King is now struggling to find a new healthcare provider. Her only options are driving 3 hours to Beaumont or waiting 4 months for the next opening with one Bryan clinic that's willing to take her case. I'm probably up against that window right now, she explained to KUT. There are some decisions that I need to make, and sticking your head in the sand only works for so long. Their laws. Planned Parenthood found her precancerous cells, cleared her body of cancer. Right? That's what they did. And she goes to another doctor and says she wants birth control, and she's given a lecture. A religious one, I'm sure. What they're doing in Texas is not making anything safer. It's only going to lead to more health problems and more deaths. Let us go to Michigan. This from Addicting Info. Governor Rick Snyder, the Michigan Attorney General, claims one of the paramount purposes of marriage in Michigan, at least 37 other states that define marriage as a union between a man and a woman, is and has always been to regulate sexual relationships between men and women so that unique procreative capacity of such relationships benefits rather than harms society. They're arguing that only for procreation, marriage is only for procreation. So if you're elderly or you're infertile or, any number of things, right? You can only get married and be married if you're going to procreate. Right? They're regulating. These are your small government Republicans regulating sex, right? So let's move on to more sex licenses. Oh my goodness! A group of House Republicans led by Representative Paul Labrador has proposed a new bill that would provide a nationwide license to discriminate against same-sex couples. Though Labrador claims the bill protects religious liberty, it is nothing less than a blanket invitation to deny benefits to same-sex couples that they are entitled to under the law. According to the draft of the bill, H.R. 3133, there would be no consequences for any organization or individual that chooses to not recognize a same-sex marriage. The federal government shall not take an adverse action against a person on the basis that such a person acts in accordance with a religious belief, that marriage is or should be recognized as a union between one man and one woman, and that sexual relations are properly reserved for such a marriage. So they're saying the consequences of this legislation would be immense, such as that a few individuals could short-circuit the rights of gay and lesbian couples across the country. But here are some other cases where potential abuse could happen. Businesses could refuse to provide leave for an employee to take care of a sick same-sex spouse. Federal workers processing tax returns, visa applications, or Social Security filings could refuse to do their job if it meant providing benefits to a same-sex couple. Federally funded programs like homeless shelters and substance abuse programs could turn away LGBT people. A church-run hospital could refuse to provide visitation privileges to his married same-sex couple without fear of endangering their tax-exempt status. Unsurprisingly, the National Organization for Marriage has enthusiastically endorsed the legislation, and the Heritage Foundation claimed it will encourage tolerance. Did you hear that? It's going to encourage tolerance. And they're using religious liberty as their reason why they get to take away your rights. Erick Erickson thinks it's a great idea to shut down the government. Why? Well, because it would be better than giving people health care. He went on Fox News to say this. Think about this for a minute. Shutting down the government over Obamacare. Let's say this. First, the bill was passed and signed into law by the president and upheld by the Supreme Court and is going into effect whether they like it or not. Second, about half the states are running their own state exchanges or are working with the federal government to do so. So it would be those states losing the funding and being burdened by even more debt, which coincidentally may just cause them all to be forced back into a recession. Third, and most importantly, you can't exactly just shut down the government. Remember the debacle over the debt ceiling and how the rights threats caused a drop in credit rating for the United States? More on Obamacare. We're going to keep with Obamacare for just a little bit longer. The Florida Department of Health has become the latest arm of state government to distance itself from the ACA or Obamacare. It has ordered county health units to not allow outreach workers called navigators onto their property to help uninsured people sign up for subsidized health coverage. The order from C. Meade Grigg, Deputy DOH Secretary for Statewide Services, went out late Monday to the 60 local health department directors around the state. He wrote that the staff may accept informational materials from the navigators to hand out upon request. However, navigators will not conduct activities on the grounds of the health departments, Grigg wrote. He said the policy was developed after some had asked DOH for permission to operate within state facilities, presumably because uninsured people often seek help there. So much for the mission statement of the Florida Department of Health to protect, promote, and improve the health of all people in Florida. There are about 3.8 million people in Florida without health insurance. So they're saying the navigators that help people sign up for Obamacare, help people sign up for the state-run exchanges, the ACAs, they're not allowing the navigators in. So Obamacare is going to fail. If Obamacare is going to fail, I know I'm not expressing an original thought here. Let it fail. If it's really going to fail, let it fail. You can turn and say, ha ha ha, it failed. Now everybody can go back to the old system where you just get to die when you get sick. Republican efforts to sabotage Obamacare continues and continues and continues. Let's get to some good news about Obamacare. The U.S. Appeals Court ruled Tuesday that a for-profit manufacturing corporation must cover birth control in its employee health plan despite the religious beliefs of the company's owners. The decision from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals represents a victory for the Obama administration in a series of ongoing fights over the contraception policy, which critics see as a violation of religious freedom. The case began when Autocam, an automotive and medical manufacturer, sued the government over Obamacare's requirement that it cover a range of birth control methods in its employee health plan. The company's owners are practicing Catholics who see contraception as immoral and believe that some drugs covered under the rule cause abortions. On Tuesday, the 3-judge panel sent the case back to the district court with orders to dismiss the challenge. Judge Julia Smith Gibbons argued that complying with the birth control mandate is up to AutoChem, not its owners, and that the company cannot engage in religious exercise. We dismiss the claims of the individual plaintiffs on standing grounds, Gibbons wrote. U.S. appeal courts have ruled on 3 cases so far, siding with the administration twice and the plaintiffs once. The difference of opinion means the Supreme Court could decide the mandate's fate, so it could go back to the Supreme Court. The policy is designed to ensure that most working women have access to free birth control in their health plans. Churches and houses of worship are exempt, and the employees of religiously affiliated institutions will be able to obtain birth control directly from their insurance companies. Companies cannot break with the law by withholding coverage for health services just because they have a religious objection, said Bridget Amiri, senior staff attorney with the ACLU, in a statement. So, yeah, there's some good news about Obamacare. Let's get to this. Flush Rush, hate talk radio show. Rush Limbaugh has been ousted from Fargo's 101.9 FM and replaced with Rock 102 after listeners rebelled and ratings tanked. That's right, no one was listening to Rush. This comes to us from the Daily Kos. Last March, only weeks after Rush Limbaugh's attack on Sandra Fluck, KFGO, in the heart of Red State, North Dakota, joined the hate parade and switched from good old rock and roll to angry, hateful, racist, homophobic, misogynistic Rush. And the listeners were not happy. According to Mike McFeely at KFGO, it was a bitter pill for Rock 102 fans to swallow for a good while. Despite the adamant protests of Rock 102's passionate fans, including the creation of a Bring Back 102 Facebook page, which I created for the 1280 in Spokane, less successfully, obviously, but we tried. Rock 102 entered a 1.5-year period of conservative talk radio program, which will forever be referred to as In Limbaugh. I like that. The people ultimately won their station back. According to the latest Arbitron ratings from the spring 2013 handbook, the Talk 101.9, whose lineup included Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, ranked 13th in the Fargo-Moorhead market with a 1.7 share among listeners 12 and over. For comparison, the top-ranked station in Fargo-Moorhead is KFGO, which received a 15.5 share for the 12 and over. And speaking of victories, the battle against Rush Limbaugh and hate radio has caused over 2,800 sponsors to pull ads from his show. This has to do with the hundreds of thousands of people around the country protesting, making contact with sponsors, petitioning, boycotting these everyday people. Volunteers and activists in Boycott Rush, Flush Rush, and StopRush.net groups are changing the mark of radio. I'm getting in a better mood now. Hey, oh yeah. Let's keep with the good news. Pope Francis, who is blowing my mind every time he opens his mouth, in a good way, has faulted the Roman Catholic Church for focusing too much on gays, abortion, and contraception, saying the Church has become obsessed with those issues to the detriment of its larger mission to be a home for all, according to an extensive new interview published Thursday. The Church can share its views on homosexuality, abortion, and other issues, but should not interfere spiritually with the lives of gays and lesbians, the Pope added in an interview which was published in La Civiltà Cattolica, a Rome-based Jesuit journal. Forgive me. We have to find a new balance, otherwise even the moral edifice of the Church is likely to fall like a house of cards, losing the freshness and fragrance of the gospel, Francis said in an interview. The Church has sometimes locked itself up in small things, in small-minded rules, Francis said. The people of God want pastors, not clergy acting like bureaucrats or Democrat bureaucrats or government officials. He's very open, honest, and candid like we have not seen in a pope before. He critiques people who focus too much on tradition, who want to go to a time in the past that does not exist anymore, said Friar James Martin of American Magazine. In an interview, Francis does not come out in support of gay marriage, abortion rights, or contraception, saying that the church positions on those issues are clear. But he added that the proclamation of the saving love of God comes before moral and religious imperatives. A person once asked me in a provocative manner if I approved of homosexuality, he said, the Jesuit priest Antonio Spadaro, who conducted the interview for La Civiltà Católica. I replied with another question. Tell me, when God looks at a gay person, does he endorse the existence of this person with love or reject and condemn this person? We must always consider this person. Francis, who is 76, some critics have said the Pope has shifted from being more outspoken on conservative issues when he was a Jesuit province superior in Argentina and later was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. The Pope, who was appointed to the Jesuit leadership position when he was 36, said his youthful lack of experience made him too authoritarian of a leader. But I have never been a right-winger, he said. And keeping with the good news, Steve Young, the former quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, urged tolerance and acceptance of the LGBT community in a keynote speech Saturday at a conference for gay Mormons in Salt Lake City, Utah. Young said his goal is to build bridges with my gay brothers and sisters. According to the AP, we need to see each other as Jesus sees us, he could be quoted as saying. The Mormon community was active in 2008, pushing for the passage of California's Prop 8, which outlawed marriage equality in the state. The U.S. Supreme Court, of course, struck that ban down in June. Young is a Mormon who played football at BYU. In 2008, he made news when his wife Barbara put out a no on Prop 8 sign in their front yard. The NFL's Legends comments come amid the speculation that the first NFL player could come out soon. At the conference, Young introduced his wife, whose older brother is gay, by telling the crowd, "There's not a day that goes by that you are not on her mind. She has spent countless hours advocating for you." They're speaking to the gay brother. "One of the most beautiful things about this church is that we can evolve," his wife said at the conference. "It may not go as fast as everyone wants, but it is evolving." And this brings me to my final thought, that we are changing for the better. Back when it was apparent that the Catholic Church was going to get a new pope, we said on this program, myself, Angela, and Kevin, I think I really tried to drive it home, that it'd be really nice to see a more liberal pope. And we all kind of shrugged it off. It's not going to happen, right? That's a really conservative church. But the new pope is giving me new hope. Put that on a bumper sticker, right? What happened with Miss America? All those monster-sized racist statements that just were all over the place, right? And really haven't stopped. Well, in a poll that was conducted, 86% of people said they're fine with the new Miss America. Okay, so say, I think 10% said they didn't care. So it's like 4%. It's a small. They're very vocal, the racists, but they're a very small sliver. Okay, better than 3/4 are just fine with the new Miss America. And by the way, I don't even care about Miss America. Me personally, Melvin, talking to you on the mic here, it means nothing in my life. I observed the racism from it and pointed that out, but really, I don't even care if we have Miss America. It means nothing to me. Okay? Better than 90% of folks, if you average all the states, approve of common sense gun laws. Okay? 13 states now allow marriage equality. Most people in America approve of Obamacare. A significant majority. And after it's implemented, that number is just going to grow by leaps and bounds. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving in a wildly positive direction. Much like Steve Young's wife said, though, I understand it's not happening perhaps at the rate that we would like it to. It's a slow evolution. And she used the word, so I get to use the word. But it is an evolution. And it is happening. Steve Young, I remember being a Mormon. And Steve Young was very big in the church. As in, he was somebody that my Mormon friends looked up to and we aspired to. Like, a very famous Mormon, right? And now, he's still influential and still a leader in the church. Not as in a pastor or anything, but he's still looked up to in the church. And so his wife's brother's gay. And that's maybe what changed his mind. And unfortunately, that seems to be what it's going to take to change a lot of people's minds. It shouldn't take having a gay relative to change your mind. People are people. And if they're good, hardworking, honest citizens, they deserve all the same rights as everyone else does. And there's no reason, not even on religious grounds, can you say that they don't deserve the same rights. Even though a lot of you are, you can't say that. It's not fair. I know life isn't fair, but these are your fellow Americans, and you can't treat them that way. America is moving in a more positive direction. Slowly, but surely. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to watch the sun rise together. Then, after we get full equality, which may not happen in my lifetime, but I'm raising my kids to be loving and accepting. I'm not going to use the word tolerant because we don't tolerate our gay brothers and sisters. Okay? We tolerate people who are annoying or dangerous. We love and accept our brothers and sisters as they are, as they naturally, comfortably are. I'm raising my daughters to be loving and accepting, not tolerant, loving, accepting, and understanding. So I won't see inequality eradicated in my lifetime. I'm certain of that. But I'm very hopeful that it will be eradicated in their lifetime or maybe their children's lifetime. It's coming. There's hope. We're well on our way, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for joining me for another barn burner episode of The Fire You Can't Put Out. This is me, impassioned, again, going off on this microphone as I enjoy doing once a week. Special thanks to Kevin for working with me on the show. I know you haven't heard the sweet sound of his voice in a while, but he'll be back. Same with Angela. We're going to get it all worked out. We're going to get her back on the show. And Leo, I know you're out there, brother. Thank you for your continued support. We are The Fire You Can't Put Out. Stick with us, and I promise we will prevail. Good day.